Book 5. The Existence of God Demonstrated by the Works of Nature. Chapter 1. Object of this book. One of the principal doctrines of Christianity yet remains to be examined. That is, the state of rewards and punishments in another life. But we cannot enter upon this important subject without first speaking of the two pillars which support the edifice of all the religions in the world: the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. These topics are, moreover, suggested by the natural development of our subject, since it is only after having followed faith here below that we can accompany her to those heavenly mansions to which she speeds her flight on leaving the earth. Adhering scrupulously to our plan, we shall banish all abstract ideas from our proofs of the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, and shall employ only such arguments as may be derived from the poetical and sentimental considerations, or, in other words, from the wonders of nature and the moral feelings. Plato and Cicero among the ancients, Clarke and Leibniz among the moderns, have metaphysically and almost mathematically demonstrated the existence of a supreme being, while the brightest geniuses in every age have admitted this consoling dogma. If it is rejected by certain sophists, God can exist just as well without their suffrage. Death alone, to which atheists would reduce all things, stands in need of defenders to vindicate its rights, since it has but little reality for man. Let us leave it, then, its deplorable partisans, who are not even agreed among themselves. For if they who believe in providence concur in the principal points of their doctrine, they, on the contrary, who deny the Creator, are involved in everlasting disputes concerning the basis of their nothingness. They have before them an abyss. To fill it up, they want only the foundation stone, but they are at a loss where to procure it. Such, moreover, is the essential character of error, that when this error is not our own, it instantly shocks and disgusts us. Hence the interminable quarrels among atheists. Chapter 2. A General Survey of the Universe. There is a God. The plants of the valley and the cedars of the mountain bless his name. The insect hums his praise. The elephant salutes him with the rising day. The bird glorifies him among the foliage. The lightning bespeaks his power, and the ocean declares his immensity. Man alone has said, "There is no God." Has he then in adversity never raised his eyes toward heaven? Has he in prosperity never cast them on the earth? Is nature so far from him that he has not been able to contemplate its wonders, or does he consider them as the mere results of fortuitous causes? But how could chance have compelled crude and stubborn materials to arrange themselves in such exquisite order? It might be asserted that man is the idea of God displayed, and the universe his imagination made manifest. They who have admitted the beauty of nature as a proof of a supreme intelligence ought to have pointed out a truth which greatly enlarges the sphere of wonders. It is this: motion and rest, darkness and light, the seasons, the revolutions of the heavenly bodies, which give variety to the decorations of the world, are successive in only appearance and permanent in reality. The scene that fades upon our view is painted in brilliant colors for another people. It is not the spectacle that is changed, but the spectator. Thus God has combined in his work absolute duration and progressive duration. The first is placed in time, the second in space. By means of the former, the beauties of the universe are one, infinite and invariable. By means of the latter, they are multiplied, finite, and perpetually renewed. Without the one, there would be no grandeur in the creation. Without the other, it would exhibit nothing but dull uniformity. Here, time appears to us in a new point of view. The smallest of its fractions become a complete whole, which comprehends all things, and in which all things transpire from the death of an insect to the birth of a world. Each minute is in itself a little eternity. Combine, then, at the same moment in imagination the most beautiful incidents of nature, represent to yourself at once all the hours of the day and all the seasons of the year, a spring morning and an autumnal morning, a night spangled with stars and a night overcast with clouds, meadows enameled with flowers, forests stripped by the frosts, and fields glowing with their golden harvests. You will then have a just idea of the prospect of the universe. While you are gazing with admiration upon the sun sinking beneath the western arch, another beholds it emerging from the regions of aurora. By what inconceivable magic does it come that this aged luminary, which retires to rest, as if weary and heated in the dusky arms of night, is at the very same moment that youthful orb which awakes bathed in dew, and sparkling through the grey curtains of the dawn? Every moment of the day the sun is rising, glowing at its zenith, and setting on the world. Or rather our senses deceive us, and there is no real sunrise, noon, or sunset. The whole is reduced to a fixed point, from which the orb of day emits at one and the same time 3 lights from one single substance. This triple splendor is perhaps the most beautiful incident in nature, for while it affords an idea of perpetual magnificence and omnipresence of God, it exhibits a most striking image of his glorious Trinity. We cannot conceive what a scene of confusion nature would present if it were abandoned to the sole movements of matter. The clouds, obedient to the laws of gravity, would fall perpendicularly upon the earth or ascend in pyramids into the air. A moment afterward, the atmosphere would be too dense or too rarefied for the organs of respiration. The moon, either too near or too distant, would at one time be invisible, at another would appear bloody and covered with enormous spots, or would alone fill the whole celestial concave with her disproportionate orb. Seized, as it were, with a strange kind of madness, she would pass from one eclipse to another, or rolling from one side to side, would exhibit that portion of her surface which earth has never yet beheld. The stars would appear to be under the influence of the same capricious power, and nothing would be seen but a succession of tremendous conjunctions. One of the summer signs would be speedily overtaken by one of the signs of winter. The cowherd would lead the Pleiades, and the lion would roar in Aquarius. Here the stars would dart along with the rapidity of lightning. Here they would be suspended motionless. Sometimes crowding together in groups, they would form a new galaxy. At others, disappearing all at once, and to use the expression of Tertullian, rending the curtain of the universe, they would expose to view the abysses of eternity. No such appearances, however, will strike terror into the breast of man, until the day when the Almighty will drop the reins of the world, employing for its destruction no other means than to leave it to itself. Chapter 3. Organization of Animals and of Plants. Passing from general to particular considerations, let us examine whether the different parts of the universe exhibit the same wisdom that is so plainly expressed in the whole. We shall here avail ourselves of the testimony of a class of men, benefactors alike of science and of humanity. We mean the professors of the medical art. Dr. Neuventet, in his treatise on the existence of God, has undertaken to demonstrate the reality of final causes. Without following him through all his observations, we shall content ourselves with adducing a few of them. In treating of the 4 elements which he considers in their harmonies with man and the creation in general, he shows, in respect to air, how our bodies are marvelously preserved beneath an atmosphere column, equal to its pressure to a weight of 20,000 pounds. He proves that the change of one single quality, either as to rarefaction or density, in the element we breathe, would be sufficient to destroy every living creature. It is the air that causes the smoke to ascend. It is the air that retains liquids in vessels. By its agitation it purifies the heavens, and wafts to the continents the clouds of the ocean. He then demonstrates by a multitude of experiments the necessity of water. Who can behold without astonishment the wonderful quality of this element by which it ascends contrary to all the laws of gravity, and an element lighter than itself, in order to supply us with rain and dew? He considers the arrangement of mountains so as to give a circulation to rivers, the topography of these mountains and islands and on the mainland, the outlets of gulfs, bays, and Mediterranean waters, the innumerable advantages of seas. Nothing escapes the attention of this good and learned man. In the same manner he unfolds the excellence of the earth as an element, and its admirable laws as a planet. He likewise describes the utility of fire, and the extensive aid it has afforded in the various departments of human industry. When he passes to animals, he observes that those which we call domestic come into the world with precisely that degree of instinct which is necessary in order to tame them, while others that are unserviceable to man never lose their natural wildness. Can it be chance that inspires the gentle and useful animals with the disposition to live together in our fields, and prompts ferocious beasts to roam by themselves in unfrequented places? Why should not flocks of tigers be led by the sound of the shepherd's fife? Why should not a colony of lions be frisking in our parks, among the wild thyme and the dew, like the little animals celebrated by La Fontaine? Those ferocious beasts could never be employed for any other purpose than to draw the ear of some triumphant warrior, as cruel as themselves, or to devour Christians in an amphitheater. Alas, tigers are never civilized among men, but men oftentimes assume the savage disposition of the tiger. The observations of Neuentet on the qualities of birds are not less interesting. Their wings, convex above and concave underneath, are oars perfectly adapted to the element they are designed to cleave. The wren that delights in the hedges of thorn and arbutus, which to her are extensive deserts, is provided with a double eyelid to preserve its sight from every kind of injury. But how admirable are the contrivances of nature! This eyelid is transparent, and the little songstress of the cottage can drop this wonderful veil without being deprived of sight. Providence kindly ordained that she should not lose her way when conveying the drop of water or the grain of millet to her nest, and that her little family beneath the bush should not pine at her absence. And what ingenious springs move the feet of birds! It is not by a play of the muscles which their immediate will determines that they hold themselves firm on a branch. Their feet are so constructed that when they are pressed in the center or at the heel, the toes naturally grasp the object which presses against them. From this mechanism it follows that the claws of a bird adhere more or less firmly to the object on which it alights, as the motion of that object is more or less rapid. For in the waving of the branch, either the branch presses against the foot, or the foot against the branch, and in either case there results a more forcible contraction of the claws. When in the winter seasons, at the approach of night, we see ravens perched on the leafless summit of the oak, we imagine that it is only by continental watchfulness and attention, and with incredible fatigue, that can maintain their position amid the howling tempests and the obscurity of night. The truth, however, is that unconscious of danger and defying the storm, they sleep amid the war of winds. Boreas himself fixes them to the branch, from which we every moment expect to see them hurled, and like the veteran mariner whose hammock is slung to the masts of a vessel, the more they are rocked by the hurricane, the more profound are their slumbers. With respect to the organization of fishes, their very existence in the watery element and the relative change in their weight, which enables them to float in water of greater or less gravity, and to descend from the surface to the lowest depths of the abyss, are perpetual wonders. The fish is a real hydrostatic machine, displayed 1,000 phenomenon by means of a small bladder, which it empties or replenishes with air at pleasure. The flowering of plants and the use of the leaves and roots are also prodigies which afford Neuentet a curious object of investigation. He makes the striking observation that the seeds of plants are so disposed by their figure and weight as to fall invariably upon the ground in the position which is favorable to germination. Now, if all the things were the production of chance, would not some change be occasionally witnessed in the final causes? Why should there not be fishes without the air bladder which gives them the faculty of floating? And why would not the eaglet, that has yet no need of weapons, have its shell broken by the bill of a dove? But strange to relate, there is never any mistake or accident of this sort in blind nature. In whatever way you throw the dice, they always turn up the same numbers. This is a strange fortune, and we strongly suspect that before it drew the world from the urn of eternity, it had already secretly arranged the lot of everything. But are there not monsters in nature, and do they not afford instances of a departure from the final cause? True, but take to notice that these beings inspire us with horror. So powerful is the instinct of the deity in man, so easily is he shocked when he does not perceive in an object the impress of his supreme intelligence. Some have pretended to derive from these irregularities an objection against providence. But we consider them, on the contrary, as a manifest confirmation of that very providence. In our opinion, God has permitted this distortion of matter expressly for the purpose of teaching us what the creation would be without him. It is the shadow that gives greater effect to the light, a specimen of those laws of chance which, according to atheists, brought forth the universe. Chapter 4. Instinct of Animals. Having discovered in the organization of beings a regular plan which cannot possibly be ascribed to chance, and which presupposes a directing mind, we will pass to the examination of other final causes, which are neither less prolific nor less wonderful than the preceding. Here we shall present the result of our own investigations, of a study which we would never have interrupted had not Providence called us to other occupations. We were desirous, if possible, of producing a religious natural history in opposition to all those modern scientific works in which mere matter is considered. That we might be contemptuously reproached with ignorance, we resolved to travel and to see every object with our own eyes. We shall therefore introduce some of our observations on the different instincts of animals and of plants, on their habits, migrations, and loves. The field of nature cannot be exhausted. We always find there a new harvest. It is not in a menagerie where the secrets of God are kept engaged that we acquire a knowledge of the divine wisdom. To become deeply impressed with its existence, we must contemplate it in the deserts. How can a man return an infidel from the regions of solitude? Woe to the traveler who, after making the circuit of the globe, would come back an atheist to the paternal roof. Was it possible for us, when we penetrated at midnight into the solitary vale inhabited by beavers and overshadowed by the fir tree, and where reigned a profound silence under the mild glare of the moon, as peaceful as the people whose labors it illumined, was it possible for us not to discover in this valley some trace of a divine intelligence? Who then placed the square and the level in the eye of that animal which has sagacity to construct a dam, shelving, toward the water and a perpendicular on the opposite side? What philosopher taught this singular engineer the law of hydraulics, and made him so expert with his incisive teeth and his flattened tail? Remer never foretold the vicissitudes of the seasons with the accuracy of the same beaver, whose stores, more or less copious, indicate in the month of June the longer or shorter duration of the ices of January. Alas, by questioning the divine omnipotence, men have struck with sterility all the works of the Almighty. Atheism has extinguished with its icy breath the fire of nature which it undertook to kindle. In breathing upon creation, it has enveloped in its own characteristic darkness. There are other facts connected with the animal instinct, which, though more common and falling daily under our observation, are not the less wonderful. The hen, for instance, which is so timid, assumes the courage of a lion when it is question of defending her young. How interesting to behold her solicitude and excitement when, deceived by the treasures of another nest, little strangers escape from her and hasten to sport in the neighboring lake. The terrified mother runs round the brink, claps her wings, calls back her imprudent brood, sometimes entreating with tenderness, sometimes clucking with authority. She walks hastily on, then pauses, turns her head with anxiety, and is not pacified till she has collected beneath her wings her weakly and dripping family, which will soon give her fresh cause of alarm. Among the various instincts which the Master of Life has dispensed throughout the animal world, one of the most extraordinary is that which leads the fishes from the icy regions of the pole to a milder latitude, which they find without losing their way over the vast desert of the ocean, and appear punctually in the river where the union is to be celebrated. Spring, directed by the sovereign of the seas, prepares on our shores the nuptial pomp. She crowns the willows with verdure. She covers the grottos with moss, and expands on the surface of the waves the foliage of the water lily to serve as curtain to these beds of crystal. Scarcely are these preparations completed when the scaly tribes make their appearance. These foreign navigators animate all our shores. Some, like light bubbles of air, ascend perpendicularly from the bosom of the deep. Others gently balance themselves on the waves, or diverge from one common center, like innumerable stripes of gold. These dart their gliding forms obliquely through the azure fluid. Those sleep in a sunbeam which penetrates the silvery gauze of the billows. Perpetually wandering to and fro, they swim, they dive, they turn round, they form into squadrons, they separate and again unite. And the inhabitant of the seas, endued with the breath of life, follows with a bound the fiery track left for him by his beloved in the waves. Chapter 5. Song of Birds. It is made for man. Laws relative to the cry of animals. Nature has her seasons of festivity, for which she assembles musicians from all the regions of the globe. Skillful performers with their wondrous sonatas, itinerant minstrels who can only sing short ballads, pilgrims who repeat 1,000 times the couplets of their long, solemn songs, are beheld flocking together from all quarters. The thrush whistles, the swallow twitters, the ring-dove coos. The first, perched on the topmost branch of an elm, defies our solitary blackbird, who is in no respect inferior to the stranger. The second, lodged under some hospitable roof, utters his confused cries, as in the days of Evander. The third, concealed amid the foliage of an oak, prolongs her soft moanings like the undulating sound of a horn in the forests. The redbreast, meanwhile, repeats her simple strain on the barn door, where she has built her compact and mossy nest. But the nightingale disdains to waste her lays amid this symphony. She waits till night has imposed silence, and takes upon herself that portion of the festival which is celebrated in its shades. When the first silence of night and the last murmurs of day struggle for the mastery on the hills, on the banks of the rivers, in the woods, and in the valleys, when the forests have hushed their 1,000 voices, when not a whisper is heard among the leaves, when the moon is high in the heavens, and the ear of man is all attention, then Philomela, the first songstress of creation, begins her hymn to the eternal. She first strikes the echoes with lively bursts of pleasure. Disorder pervades her strains. She passes abruptly from flat to sharp, from soft to loud. She pauses. Now she is slow, and now quick. It is the expression of a heart intoxicated with joy, a heart palpitating under the pressure of love. But her voice suddenly fails. The bird is silent. She begins again, but how changed are her accents! What tender melody! Sometimes you hear a languid modulation, though varied in its form, sometimes a tune more monotonous, like the chorus of our ancient ballads, those masterpieces of simplicity and melancholy. Singing is as often an expression of sadness as of joy. The bird that has lost her young still sings. She still repeats the notes of her happy days, for she knows no other. But by a stroke of her art, the musician has merely changed her key, and the song of pleasure is converted into the lamentation of grief. It would be very gratifying to those who seek to disinherit man and to snatch him from the empire of nature, if they could prove that nothing has been made for him. That the song of birds, for example, is ordained so expressly for our ears, that in vain we persecute those tenants of the woods, in vain we rob them of their nests, pursue, wound, and entangle them in snares. We may give them the acutest pain, but we cannot compel them to be silent. In spite of our cruelty, they cannot forbear to charm us, as they are obliged to fulfill the decrees of Providence. When held captives in our house, they multiply their notes. There must be some secret harmony in adversity, for all the victims of misfortune are inclined to sing. Even when the bird-catcher, with the refinement of barbarity, scoops out the eyes of a nightingale, It has the extraordinary effect of rendering his voice still more melodious. This Homer of the feathered tribes earns a subsistence by singing, and composes his most enchanting airs after he has lost his sight. Demodocus, says the poet of Chios, describing himself in the person of the Phaeacian bard, was beloved by the Muse, but she bestowed upon him the good and the bad. She deprived him of the blessing of sight, but she gave him the sweetness of song. The bird seems to be the true emblem of the Christian here below. Like him, it prefers solitude to the world, heaven to earth, and its voice is ever occupied in celebrating the wonders of the Creator. There are certain laws relative to the cries of animals which we believe have not yet been observed, though they are highly deserving of notice. The varied language of the inhabitants of the desert appears to be adapted to the grandeur or the charms of the places in which they live, and to the hours of the day at which they make their appearance. The roaring of the lion, loud, rough, and harsh, is in accordance with the burning regions, where it is heard at sunset, while the lowing of our cattle charms the rural echoes of our valleys. The bleating of the goat has in it something tremulous and wild, and the rocks and ruins among which he loves to climb. The warlike horse imitates the shrill sound of the clarion, and, as if sensible that he was not made for rustic occupations, he is silent under the lash of the husbandman, and neighs beneath the bridle of the warrior. Night, according as it is pleasant or gloomy, brings forth the nightingale or the owl. The one seems to sing for the zephyrs, the groves, the moon, and for lovers. The other hoots for the winds, aged forests, darkness, and death. In short, almost all carnivorous animals have a particular cry which resembles that of their prey. The sparrowhawk squeaks like the rabbit, and mews like a kitten. The cat herself has a kind of whining tone like that of the little birds of our gardens. The wolf bleats, lows, or barks. The fox clucks or cries. The tiger imitates the bellowing of the bull, and the sea bear has a kind of frightful roar like the noise of the breakers among which he seeks his prey. The law of which we speak is very astonishing, and perhaps conceals some tremendous secret. We may observe that monsters among men follow the same law as carnivorous animals. There have been many instances of tyrants who exhibited some mark of sensibility in their countenance and voice, and who affected the language of the unhappy creatures whose destruction they were meditating. Providence, however, has ordained that we should not be absolutely deceived by men of this savage character. We have only to examine them closely to discover under the garb of mildness an air of falsehood and rapacity 1,000 times more hideous than their fury itself. Chapter 6. Nests of Birds. How admirably is the providence of the great Creator displayed in the nests of birds! Who can contemplate without emotion this divine beneficence which imparts industry to the weak and foresight to the thoughtless? No sooner have the trees expanded their first blossoms than 1,000 diminutive artisans begin their labors on every side. Some convey long straws into the hole of an ancient wall. Others construct buildings in the windows of a church. Others again rob the horse of his hair, or carry off the wool torn by the jagged thorn from the back of the sheep. There woodcutters arrange small twigs in the waving summit of a tree. Here spinsters collect silk from a thistle. 1,000 palaces are reared, and every palace is a nest, while each nest witnesses the most pleasing changes. First a brilliant egg, then a young one covered with down. This tender nestling becomes fledged. His mother instructs him by degrees to rise up on his bed. He soon acquires strength to perch on the edge of his cradle, from which he takes the first survey of nature. With mingled terror and transport, he drops down among his brothers and sisters, who have not yet beheld this magnificent sight. But, summoned by the voice of his parents, he rises a second time from his couch, and this youthful monarch of the air, whose head is still encircled by the crown of infancy, already ventures to contemplate the waving summits of the pines and the abysses of verdure beneath the paternal oak. But while the forest welcome with pleasure their new guest, some aged bird, who feels his strength forsake him, alights beside the current. There, solitary and resigned, he patiently waits death, on the brink of the same stream where he sang his first loves, and beneath the trees which still bear his nest and harmonious posterity. We will notice here another law of nature. Among the smaller species of birds, the eggs are commonly tinged with one of the prevailing colors of the male. The bullfinch builds in the hawthorn, the gooseberry, and other bushes of our gardens. Her eggs are slate-colored, like the plumage of her back. We recollect having once found one of the nests in a rosebush. It resembled a shell of a mother-pearl containing 4 blue gems. A rose, bathed in the dews of morning, was suspended above it. The male bullfinch sat motionless on a neighboring shrub, like a flower of purple azure. These objects were reflected in the water of the stream, together with the shade of an aged walnut tree, which served as a background to the scene, and behind which appeared the ruddy tints of the morning. In this little picture, the Almighty presented us an idea of the graces with which he has decked all nature. Among the larger birds, the law respecting the color of the egg varies. We are of opinion that, in general, the egg is white among those birds, the male of which has several females, or among those whose plumage has no fixed color for the species. Among those which frequent the waters and forests and build their nests on the sea or on the summits of lofty trees, the egg is generally a bluish green, and as it were of the same tint as the elements by which it is surrounded. Certainly birds which reside on the tops of ancient and deserted towers have green eggs like ivy, or reddish like the old buildings they inhabit. It is therefore a law which may be considered as invariable that the bird exhibits in her egg an emblem of her loves, her habits, and her destinies. The mere inspection of this brittle monument will almost enable us to determine to what tribe it belonged, what were its dress, habits, and tastes, whether it passed its days amid the dangers of the sea, or, more fortunate, among the charms of a pastoral life, whether it was tame or wild, and inhabited the mountain or the valley. The antiquary of the forest is conducted by a science much less equivocal than the antiquary of the city. A scathed oak, with all its mosses, proclaims much more plainly the hand that gave it existence than a ruined column declares by what architect it was reared. Among men, tombs are so many leaves of their history. Nature, on the contrary, records her facts on living tablets. She has no need of granite or marble to perpetuate her writings. Time has destroyed the annals of the sovereigns of Memphis, once inscribed on their funeral pyramids, but has it been able to efface a single letter of the history marked on the eggshell of the Egyptian ibis? This is the end of chapters 1 through 6 of Book 5 in Part 1 of The Genius of Christianity by Chateaubriand. Thank you for listening.